We've just finished the second race of the 2023 season.
I don't think it's okay. This is the way the rules are being set out.
I can't remember the last time I've seen an incorrect starting grid position penalty.
The only man not smiling there is Jos Verstappen.
Who is the second fastest team after the Red Bulls? Welcome back to another episode of Fine Margins. I am Ben. I'm obviously joined by my co-host Bella. We've just finished the second race of the 2023 season at Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and it was another weekend of just pure Red Bull domination with a win by Checo. Fernando Alonso got his 100th podium for about 3 hours, and then it was taken away because of a 10-second penalty given to him. But I guess the big question remains after this race is kind of who is the second fastest team after the Red Bulls? Is it the Mercs, Ferraris, or the Aston Martins? This episode of Fine Margins, we will cover the race results and the key takeaways and each team's individual performance.
So let's kick off with the key takeaways in Jeddah. So as you wrote down in our notes, it was Red Bull's complete obliteration of the competition. And I think the reason we can say that, and we can go into the team performance later, is really simply that when Max qualified in 15th, even at that point, people were saying he's probably going to win the race, despite qualifying in that position after an issue with his car. Now, what ended up happening is he was 4th by lap 20. So the ease at which he was overtaking through the speed of the Red Bull, I think, is indicative of why people see this Red Bull dominance. And then, of course, Checo sitting on pole after Max wasn't able to get into Q3. And then, although he lost the lead at the beginning of the race, then, of course, taking it back and maintaining that lead, it was very easy for the two Red Bulls. Mercedes' concept is wrong, but as we'll go into the news later, they're excited about their updates. You're just still seeing them not really be that competitive. I think because they have two great drivers in the seats, they're able to maintain and convert wins, so Russell coming up into 3rd and Lewis coming up into 5th is because they're good drivers and there was any major strategy mistakes, but they're not, competitive per se. And then Ferrari, as you also wrote down, is in mid-season form already. That is another key takeaway. So what do we mean? Well, as we'll go into later, there's still some Ferrari things happening at Ferrari. Ben, reading your notes is hilarious. McLaren could not have started the season worse. I probably would say that's a big takeaway after the second race is how bad McLaren is sitting in the pack, and they are a Haas comparison at the moment of just how slow they are and how uncompetitive they are. And I think that's so sad when you have two great drivers being Norris and Piastri. And then, final big key theme of today's race was the FIA, which is also not a surprise, and nor is it rare that they are in our key themes, but the FIA's delay in decision making, whether in giving provisional standings of who's won the race, whether about informing teams of penalties. And I think the big one here is not Aston Martin's first penalty, which was 5 seconds for Alonso not lining up properly at the beginning of the grid, but more so it was Aston Martin's second penalty for not serving the 5-second penalty properly. Now, what you need to know about that is that verdict was given to them 35 laps later. It was even given to them after Alonso had gone onto the podium, taken pictures on the podium, sprayed champagne on the podium, tweeted about the podium, and then they took away his 3rd position. I just think that is really poor form. And to be honest, a lot of the drivers were making the same comments, that not only were some of the verdicts very stringent in qualifying yesterday, but also how badly they were distributed.
Well, I mean, on that point of the FIA, well, firstly, Russell came out and said after he was told that he got the podium face that, he didn't. Rob obviously was very happy to get another trophy and finish the podium, but he didn't deserve it. He said, Fernando Alonso deserved that podium. But 3 points that FIA issue. Firstly, honestly, I think that they saw this and said, there's got to be a way we can spice up this race. Let's just throw in some last minute changes. Secondly, it's fascinating how this is the second race in a row that we've had these penalties given. Incorrect grid start position and failure to serve the penalty correctly. It happened to Esteban Ocon in the first race of the season. It's just very strange that we've never seen... I can't remember the last time I've seen an incorrect starting grid position penalty. And now it's 2 weeks in a row. 2 weeks in a row. And in addition to that, they both failed to serve that correctly. And finally, it's very odd because Mercedes told George, close the gap, there's a chance we'll get a 5-second penalty. But they didn't tell Hamilton. But what's strange about that is, why would they assume it'd be a 5-second penalty? Because this happened to Ocon the race before, and he was given a 10-second penalty. So if you assume there's consistency among the refereeing of the sport, you should have assumed that would have been a 10-second penalty, and then you could have potentially pushed Hamilton to end up in that 4th position, which I found was odd. But yeah, I mean, it's the FIA. They do like that. We've seen them before. They like to spice up races now and then.
I think the thing is, though, is, when Alonso was on the comms after in the interview, he was kind of laughing about it. And he said, well, I'm happy because clearly the car is a 3rd place kind of car. We are competitive. And yeah, sure, I've lost 3 points. I went from 15 to 12. I think it's very easy for him to be quite chill about that now. But if it was a championship deciding race and you lost it because of an inadequate... It's not okay that these decisions are being done the way they are. Like, I think everyone's laughing about it, but it's actually quite a big thing. You're seeing repetitions of what happened to Hamilton in 2021, in that decisions being delayed like that, or doubt as to what the rules are in a sport like Formula One, where it literally comes down to hundredths of a second. I don't think it's okay that this is the way the rules are being set out. And I don't think it's fun to watch a race that then gets completely changed. Nothing to do with the racing, but to do with technicalities that are not clear to the teams or the drivers. You know what I mean? I do think the FIA is ruining part of F1 by being so weird about everything.
Everyone knows what it's like to lose a championship by the smallest points margin ever. One of them is Fernando Alonso when he lost it to Vettel in his Ferrari day. But it's also, I think it could be quite costly. We don't know obviously how costly it will be, but Aston Martin are in that 2nd place team standings battle with Mercedes, and now Mercedes have piped up to 2nd, partly because they lost 3 points, but also because Lance Stroll DNF, and obviously that gives you 0 points. But they could potentially be in a very tight battle for 2nd place with Mercedes, And 3 points is 3 points. So it is odd. It's odd how they continuously choose to referee the game sometimes.
I honestly think that pissed me off more than anything. But moving on into team performances. So Ben, do you want to kick off with Red Bull and what happened there?
I mean, there's just not much to say, is it? I mean, so I guess we could start with Perez, who obviously went pole.
And had a wonderful drive.
Yeah, he had a great drive. Didn't have the best start. Lost out to Fernando Alonso. Fernando Alonso took the lead, which was, I think, the first time Fernando Alonso has been in the lead since, they said something since like 2012 or 2013, like a long time ago. And then Perez retook the lead and frankly never looked threatened since. There was
also had a good restart after
had a very good restart after the safety car. So they looked like we'll get into Max's race, but once Max went to 2nd, there could have been a battle, and there was some confusion between the team because Perez was asking, what's my target time? And then they gave him the target time.
And they said like 34.
Slower than Max's, and he's like, why is that the case?
Yeah.
Like, I'm not going to lose this lead to Max.
Well, he said, what's the target time? And they said it. And then he said, well, what's Max's time? And then they said that. And then he said, well, why did you tell me? And it's the same when Max went on the radio. He was like, what's the gap? And the team were like, we're not concerned with that at the moment. And Max was like, but I am. And then, obviously, we're quick to make these kind of judgments, but building on how last year ended with Red Bulls and the internal dilemmas within the team after, the stories about Monaco and Checo and whether, the tension between the two drivers. Today, which Sky Sports immediately picked up on, when Checo was having his celebration, the whole team was there, celebrating, and Jos Verstappen was right next to them, like in the crowd next to them, and even Sky Sports commented, the only man not smiling there is Jos Verstappen. And I think that's really sad. I think this very weird tension that clearly divides some people in Red Bull, or at least the drivers, is really sad, because do I think it's merited? Is Checo one of the drivers that's going out saying, I absolutely have to beat my teammate? And no, he seems pretty aware of the gig that Max is. So he's not out there to get Max, but at the same time, if he's held the first position in a race and then your race engineer is not telling you the right time to maintain that position when you know you can, I can see how there's a lack of trust there. And if I'm being honest, if I ever think that Red Bull has a downfall, I think it will be this bizarre, very toxic teammateship between Max and whoever his teammate is, because it clearly isn't just between the drivers. It goes down to the way the communication happens as a whole. And I was super disappointed seeing Jos as like that, because then you can just go back to when Hamilton lost, the World Championship at Abu Dhabi, and his dad went up to Jos and shook his hand. And that is sportsmanship, not having a tantrum because your son came second.
It is odd. I mean, the team clearly favours Max Verstappen, we know that, and that's not a criticism of Max, but a criticism of the team and how they micromanage the relationship between the two drivers. It was very odd to see, and it's nice to see Checo kind of seeing through the smoke and mirrors. But if we look at Max's race, I mean, it was just, he went from 15th to 2nd, and it was not a challenge. I mean, it was he obviously was a very impressive drive to go from 15th to 12th, but it just seems like another day for him.
Sure, but what was interesting in the commentary is even when he was overtaking Alonso, I don't remember who it was saying, oh, it's kind of like Alonso saw a blue flag and just let him pass. That's really odd to see. Because Alonso always fights back. But I guess my question when I was watching that is, are the drivers thinking there's no point fighting him because his car is so much quicker and I have a different race to race? Because that's what it seemed like, that no one was fighting him at all.
I mean, more importantly, Hamilton, obviously we know the rivalry between Verstappen and Hamilton, how when they're next to each other they like to race hard. Hamilton just let him go. I mean, and it's not, not even defend. There's nothing you can really do, and they just let it pass. And I think Lewis came out and said after the race, he said that's the fastest car I've ever seen on track. Which he does. If you can say one thing about Lewis, as much as we love Lewis and respect him as a driver, he can over exaggerate things at a time. I don't know if that's the fastest car he's ever seen. But there is truth in saying, I mean, the car is incredibly dominant compared to the rest of the competition, and there is a clear gap.
Which is why it was so funny hearing Toto's news recently saying if Red Bull want to put a sticker on the upgrade day for Mercedes, they can. I must admit, Toto is coming out quite confident about the upgrades that they're bringing, and I think that's a really nice segue into Mercedes and their performance today.
Yeah, so the Mercs qualified 4th and 8th, and they started in 7th due to Charles Leclerc's 10-grid penalty. Russell, frankly, had a very quiet race. He couldn't overtake the cars in front of him because they were simply faster. In that, he can overtake Perez and Alonso, and then he ends up getting overtaken by Max, who obviously in a much faster car and who drove an incredible race to get from 15th to 12th. And obviously finished 4th, but got moved up to 3rd because Alonso got like we said before, a 10-second penalty after the race. He frankly had a very tidy race. And Russell has a lot of these races where he's not really competing with anyone. He's always somewhere between.
He's just alone, 100%.
3rd to 5th position. He's just there.
He's always lurking, and that's always where he gets his podiums, actually, is in that lurking, and then something happens.
Exactly. Something happens in front of him, and he's always lurking in that 3rd to 5th spot. Just doesn't doesn't overtake anyone in front of him, but is way ahead of the people behind him. So he's kind of just driving in clean air the whole race. And then Lewis has been struggling with his car this week.
He said that George Russell's setup was better than his. And someone asked him, he was like, oh, well, do you get control over the setup? And he says, yeah, we do. It was 50-50. I went for one, he went for the other. In this circumstance, his setup was right and mine wasn't, because I was only able to match his pace, not beat it.
Not overtaking him. Lewis had, again, he's struggling with the car. They both did as well as they could have.
What do you think about the hard tyre strategy for Lewis?
I said, does that... Oh, you know what? I'll actually never understand this. If you watch the whole 2022 season, no matter what 3 sets of compounds they brought to a race, for some reason, whenever you go into the hard compound, it is a complete disaster. And to this day, I don't know why any team starts in the hard compounds or any team pits and changes the hard compounds. Because for some reason, these perennial hard compounds, no matter what 3 compounds they choose for race day, is a disaster. And they came out and they added an extra compound because last year's hardest compound, the C5, I think it goes in that order, or was it the C1? Or whichever one, the hardest compound they have was so bad that they had to bring in another option in between. And it's just odd. Every team always seems surprised that, oh, the hard compound is not working great, but yet it seems like every race they go on it sucks. And I don't know. I don't know what.
So if you were a team principal, you would say we veto the hard compound.
Just go soft mediums, And if it's an extra pit stop in the race compared to starting with hard, extra pit stop. And I understand in Jeddah why they do it, because there's a massive risk of a safety car or a red flag. So you can kind of prolong your race as long as possible and then pit during that period, which obviously saves you a lot of time. But you lose so much race pace, and inevitably because of that track positioning. But, it is what it is. Lewis did as well as he could. I thought he had a chance of potentially overtaking George after the safety car restart, because he was on mediums and George was on hards, and he seemed to have nearly closed that gap, and then it extended a lot, and I think it was just tyre degradation from the mediums. On top of that, didn't seem to pick the right setup for his car.
Moving on to the AMRs. So they came in, Alonso qualifying 3rd. I think he had a really good qualifying session. And then Stroll in 6th. Stroll DNF'd. I don't remember why.
They just asked his car to stop on track.
Yeah, they just were like, stop the car on track. There was some white smoke that came out of it. Might have been an engine thing.
They was thinking he overheated his brakes because they sprayed the brakes, but you wouldn't. I don't mean you stop the car on track because of your brakes,
Sure.
It must have been an engine issue.
Because they don't want to run the engine. Now Alonso, very, great start, overtook Sergio, got overtaken, and of course, it was this penalty issue, which, if you've not heard of it, maybe the drivers didn't know about it, and then, losing that 3rd place. I think that the summary to take from it is that they were in 3rd and they are competitive and they've got pace. Now, you're making the claim, though, that they have got a ceiling.
Yes. Obviously, Aston Martin's on the season brilliantly. For now, they seem like the second fastest team. But there is a clear gap. Obviously, you can say that about every other team, but there is a substantial gap between them and the Red Bulls, which is also true to every other team. But I just feel I trust Mercedes more as a team, even though they've seemed to have disappointed me for a year and a half now. I have more confidence in Mercedes overtaking Aston Martin than of Aston Martin kind of closing the gap to Red Bulls. I feel they'll end the season as the 3rd fastest team. That is my gut feeling. For some reason, there's a scene to him, and I like Lance Stroll, and he showed a lot of heart these last 2, recovering from his crash and broken wrists.
Training incident
to get back in the car and perform. I think if you look at him compared to all the teams around them, he has got to be he's got to be the weakest second driver in the team.
Sure.
And I think that could potentially also cost them.
Sure. Good to see Alonso in a competitive car, though. And that brings us really nicely onto Ferrari. And it's interesting for you to say that Aston Martin, if Mercedes is 2nd, is 3rd. that really says a lot about how people are viewing Ferrari, which is quite crazy after the start they had last season and how quick their car was.
Well, I mean, you could say I'm just being too reactionary and to have too much of a recency bias against their performances. But firstly, they seem to have reliability issues again, and on top of that, that means they're going to have a lot of grid penalties this year for changing components. And it seems like they've just taken a step back. It seems like during free practice sessions, they were scared to run the engine on the highest mode because of fear of reliability.
Yeah.
And if you looked at again, it was, it's only the first race of the season. The Aston Martin just caught up with them. They just have much better race pace. Ferrari doesn't have good race pace. That was one of their issues. One of their many issues of last year was that they didn't have the best race pace compared to their quality pace. In addition to that, it seems like Carlos Sainz is really struggling at the moment. He's really struggling. And I was hoping, it seemed like to the second half of last season, he kind of came into his own, especially after his win at Silverstone. But it seems like he's back to struggling again with the team.
Sure. I think the thing is, someone in a Twitter comment was saying, based on Charles Leclerc's post-race interviews, I've seen that face before on Verstappen, on Vettel,
Leclerc.
On Vettel and
Alonso.
And Alonso, exactly. This kind of, mistake made. Because I think even with what happened with the safety car, do you want to give a picture on why Leclerc got so frustrated at the team and how it's a classic Ferrari mistake that I think cost them?
So Leclerc pitted a lap before the safety car came out, which is, I don't think that's not a strategy error. That's just
timing
that happens. Safety car came out, and then Hamilton pitted during the safety car because you save a lot of time when you pit during the safety car. And only when Hamilton was kind of in the pits, quite near to the end of his pit stop, that the Ferrari race engineer decided to let him know that Hamilton's in the pit. So be careful and try and overtake him. And Leclerc said, so his race engineer, I think his name's Xavi, just way too late. You need to tell me that much earlier, because there is a part when the safety car is out, there is a part of the track when the cars aren't bunched up like they normally are at the end of the safety car. There's parts of the track where you can go all out. I imagine it's away from where the safety car incident, the yellow flag incidents come out, that you can go all out. So you can, if you went all out, have potentially overtaken Lewis Hamilton and be ahead of him when the safety car restarted. But Ferrari, they told him too late, And it's the little things that cost you. And it seems like they just can't fix this issue of just bad timing and bad decision making. And on top of that, Leclerc lost a lot of time being stuck behind Sainz. And they don't figure it out, They should have probably not pitted one because it was the second half of the race, but given team orders, Sainz, here's your target time. If you can't hit it, Leclerc's going to overtake you. But they lose a lot of race pace, just stuff like that.
They lose time by taking too long to make decisions, and it was the same.
Or by not making decisions.
Exactly, inaction. It is clear, though, that Leclerc is quick and able. And my question is very much is how long he's going to stick it out with this team. With the consideration that Aston Martin are now fast, with the consideration that, who knows what's going to happen with the Mercs, XYZ. So that's a pretty easy one.
Oh, sorry. Breaking news. Fernando Alonso his P3 has been reinstated.
Has it actually? How?
Yeah. I imagine the issue was you can only, if there's a potential breach of the rules by a team, you have to tell them that there is a potential of them breaching the rules within 30, and the FIA didn't make a decision until 32 laps after it happened. On top of that, a podium ceremony. On top of that, Alonso tweeting about it. So there was a massive gap between the incident happening and them reaching the conclusion. And I think because of that, you can't penalise a team because of it, and then they reinstated it. But I mean, that's just disastrous. I mean, that's genuinely just disastrous.
That's really good, but it's embarrassing for the FIA. That is embarrassing. Like, actually embarrassing. Awful form from the FIA that they don't know their own rules. Really poor. Okay, moving forward to the Alpines, who are, in your words, the best of the rest. Qualified 6th and 9th, Ocon 6th, Gasly 9th, and finished 8th and 9th, both in the points. Good day for them. Not sure who their main competitor is.
Can't complain. I think Alpine's they're the clear fifth fastest team. They don't seem anywhere near, in terms of race pace, in terms of the four teams ahead of them, Ferrari, Mercs, Aston Martins and Red Bulls. But they seem to be clearly quite faster than the rest. Alfa Romeo, Haas, McLaren and Alfa Tauri. So they're kind of just in that weird middle ground between, they're the best of the rest, I think, And I think basically every race this year they'll have one or two cars in the points, assuming they both finish the race. And they've got two good drivers as well. So, but it is odd, Alpine they're just on they're on an upwards journey, but it's a very slow and boring upwards journey. You look at Aston Martin. Aston Martin was worse than them for the last 2-3 years, and they've just blitzed past them all of a sudden. And I think Alpine will always remain that middle of the pack team. Like, for some reason, I have no faith in them for being a podium chasing or a title chasing team.
Yeah, and now blitzing through the rest of the pack. Alfa Romeo, no points. AlphaTauri, Tsunoda lost it to Magnussen, so no points. Williams, could have been, I think, in the points, but Albon had brake issues. The Haas got Magnussen in the points, which was great.
Kevin Magnussen, come on, boys. So we love to see. The championship starts now.
It's good to not see them at the back of the pack. It's nice. Haas is now,
I love my Haas, man. K-Mag, massive drive.
McLaren obviously had that damage early on at the beginning, causing both cars to pit, and just not a great race from them.
Journey could have not started any worse this season. The only way they could have started worse is if two cars did this race like they did last race. But there was a moment in the race when I think either Lando Norris or Oscar Piastri was battling with Logan Sargent for like 15th place or some, position that no one really cares. And the McLaren was on the tail of the William. And the William had a really bad exit after one of the turns. But they were in the long DRS train, so it means everyone had their DRS open. And it was basically a drag race during one of the straights. And like we said before, the Williams had a much worse exit than the McLarens, and the McLarens could not overtake the Williams in a drag race after having a much better exit. In fact, it seems like they lost positioning. Yeah. Their car is so draggy. On top of that, also has no downforce, which makes no sense because they work in opposite forces. The more downforce you have means the more draggy you are. But for some incredible reason, they built a car with no downforce that is also really draggy. So it just makes me think that they've got bits on their car that are just not doing anything, Like, they might as well put a sail off on their head, Because it will probably give them the same effect, Like, it's just... There's generally just bits in their car that's not giving them downforce, and that's just causing...
That is so funny.
In their aerodynamic body, and it makes no sense. Generally just makes no sense.
Yeah. So, McLaren in a nutshell. I think the silly season of this year, I'll make this call now, is going to be Norris breaking his contract and moving, if he can. I think how bad the car is, he's now in a car worse than the Williams and the Haas, and he wants to be. I can see him moving, if he can.
Well, I think McLaren will bring it back. They said that when their upgrades hit, that's the correct concept of the car, and that's the concept they should have gone down. And McLaren will get back in the points. Like, they'll be a point finisher. Like, they won't finish 10th, 8th, or 9th. Like, I think they could potentially go battle for 5th and probably finish 6th.
I think your optimism is admirable.
Lando Norris needs to go to a winning team.
Sure.
Like a winning team. But the problem is, are we going to go through the era that we went through in the turbo hybrid era when it came out? In that, realistically, like, if you look back on it in hindsight, the only team you could have gone to win a championship
Mercedes,
was Mercedes. Mercedes. Ferrari, maybe. They had chances under the Vettel days, but it's also Ferrari. You have no car. If they give you a fast car, it means something else is going to go wrong, you know? So realistically, any team, any driver could have moved to any team, but it would have made zero difference because, you know, Mercedes had the best driver in Lewis, and on top of that had the best car. So if you're not competing with the best car, you're not going to beat Lewis. And is it going to repeat that situation? You know, let's say Lando Norris leaves, he goes to Ferrari. Let's say he goes to Mercedes, you know? If he's not joining Red Bull, is he going to be able to win a championship? Is any other driver who is a potential championship winning driver? Is Leclerc going to ever win a championship Ferrari, or does he have to go to Red Bull to get the car?
That would be crazy, you know? Leclerc.
Is Lewis going to have to go to Red Bull to get a car to compete? Like, it seems like the place to be.
And that's what Toto said. Toto said,
chance,
you know, at the end of the day, Lewis needs a car that would win him championships. If we don't give that to him, like, fair enough if he leaves, which is, I think, a very interesting statement. In terms of a roundup of the news, the big one is Lewis splitting with his performance coach, Angela Cullen. No bad blood there. I think, you know, she's been with them for 7 years, and obviously people move on from things. That is, I think, a big foundation for him and his kind of successful era of dominance. So her leaving, I don't know, it's just like your number 2 person going, but she is 100%. Well, she was always there. She was his person, you know, ex-New Zealand professional hockey player. And then, of course, Toto is confident, to say the least, about the upgrades that they are bringing. And that is all of the major news in my knowledge, outside of some updates on which women will be participating in the F1 Academy, but that we'll go into more depth into that in another season. Anything from you, Ben?
No, I mean, it's just hope for this F1 season that the other teams catch up. You know, and hopefully, potentially, maybe Red Bull are limited by the upgrades they can bring because of their limited wind tunnel testing time. But at the moment, it seems like they're going to win every race of the season, and it's not even close.
The only other news is obviously Leclerc changing his ECU again. And
before, I mean, sorry, just on that point. I mean, it's just incredible how it's not even before the second race of the season even started. This is a 23 race season. There's 21 races left. He's taken a grid penalty for exceeding in components in his engine or his ECU unit. There's 21 races left. He technically has to go on with his current ECU unit to not take another penalty. I mean, it is just peak Ferrari.
Yeah. And then Red Bull, Max has a new gearbox and drive shaft. Other than that, we will be in Australia in 2 weeks for the third race of the 2023 season.
See you all at 4 a.m. in UK time.